The first thing I'm going to make today is a tincture using rose hips. Rose hips are full of vitamin C, which supports the overall immune system. They're anti-inflammatory, they have lots of antioxidants. Rose hips are also available right now to forage in lots of places. And so they're a great choice if you're in the process of deciding what to stock in your herbal medicine cabinet this winter. I don't know about you, but there seem to be lots of colds going around at the moment, and so I'm really prioritizing making tinctures that have a lot of immune boosting benefits to them. So rose hips are a good choice if you are also doing that. I started by filling my glass jar about 1/3 of the way full using dried rose hips. You can of course use fresh rose hips, and if you do use fresh rose hips, I would just recommend that you use a mortar and pestle or a knife or a food processor to chop up the rose hips a little bit before putting them in your glass jar, just to maximize the surface area of the rose hip that will be exposed to the alcohol when we make the tincture. As a rule of thumb, I tend to use a glass pint jar to make my tinctures, and I fill it about 1/3 of the way full with plant material if it's dried, and if I'm using fresh, I fill it about 3/4 of the way full. Then I covered my dried rose hips with an 80 proof unflavored vodka, and you can use whatever alcohol you have on hand as long as it's 80 proof or over. I do like to use unflavored vodka for most of my tinctures because it's a very neutral flavor, but you could also use brandy to make this, which is quite a warming alcohol, which might be nice for the colder months. Then I added cheesecloth between my lid and the jar to prevent any metal pieces on my jar from being corroded by the alcohol. This is more of an issue if you are using a mason jar with a metal lid to make this tincture. Normally, you'd now just simply set this tincture in a dark room temperature place for about 8 weeks and then strain it off and bottle it. I'm going to let it steep for just a little bit and then show you how to strain it off and bottle it. And then I'll put it all back in the jar and let it steep for the full time. I'm also going to check in on some of the herbal medicine that I made last week. My calendula infused jojoba oil is looking vibrant and bright and really beautiful, but it could use a little more oil at the top to keep all of the flowers completely submerged. You'll find with dried plant material that you often need to top up the oil or the vinegar or the alcohol if you're making a tincture or an extract, because the dried plant material absorbs the liquid. But if you see that, it's really nothing to worry about. Just top it up with the liquid if you see any plant material sticking out. This has been infusing for about a week, and I'm going to leave it probably another 2 months just to make sure that all the benefits from the flowers are in the oil. I'm going to check on my nettle and elderberry tinctures as well. Both stinging nettles and elderberries are high in vitamin C, so I wanted to make another batch of each for this winter. The nettle one is so beautiful, I think. The alcohol really brings out the vibrant green color that normally you would only see in young nettles in the springtime. It needed a bit more alcohol, so I topped it up and then gave it a good shake. The elderberry tincture looked just fine, so I added the lid again to that one. If you're looking for other tinctures that are good for the winter time, that help support the immune system, are full of antioxidants, I've made a recipe book with over 10 recipes of simple tinctures that you can make at home that are made from berries and roots that are ready to forage at this time of the year. The recipes are super simple, written for beginners. They include supply lists, so everything you need is laid out very clearly. If you're interested in seeing more about the recipe book or buying it, I will leave links to the recipe book down in the description below. Then I checked in on my fire cider, and you can really tell that things are being extracted by the raw apple cider vinegar because the vinegar is a bit cloudier, a bit darker, and the plant material is a bit duller in color. I opened this one up just to smell it because, I don't know, I think fire cider just smells absolutely delicious. It smells like a warming, spicy soup or something. This looked just fine as well, so I just added the cheesecloth again and put on the lid. I'll probably leave this one to sit about 2 more months as well, just to make sure everything is fully extracted into the vinegar. And then I'll take about a tablespoon of fire cider every day during December and in the new year to help support my immune system. I'm going to let the rosehip tincture sit a little bit longer, and I'm going to, in the meantime, try making chicory root coffee. Chicory root is full of fiber and is also anti-inflammatory, and I've been meaning to try it to see how it tastes. So I began by roasting my chicory root. I used about 2 tablespoons of the root. I roasted it a bit just to help release the oils and give it more of a toasted flavor. You can do this in the oven, but I did it on my cast iron pan to make it a bit faster. You want to make sure to keep the root moving so it doesn't burn. And then I used a mortar and pestle to grind up the roasted chicory root, but I would definitely recommend using a food processor or a coffee grinder instead, because this took a very long time. I didn't even finish grinding it up. Eventually I just thought this has got to be good enough. And I used it even though there were still a few larger chunks of the chicory root. Then I added the ground chicory root to my coffee pot and made it just like I would a regular coffee. You could use a French press to do this, or a pour over coffee machine as well. It definitely has a bitter flavor that's similar to coffee. I added some maple syrup to mine, and next time I think that I would add some heavy cream as well to break up the bitterness a bit. I would probably also use about 3 tablespoons of chicory root instead of 2 to help the drink have a bit more body to it. If you've tried making chicory root coffee, please let me know your recipe in the comments. I'd love to try this again and try out some of your recipes to make this coffee. So I am going to strain off the rosehip tincture now. I think even after a few hours, the color of the tincture is so beautiful. It's almost a ruby color. If you are using fresh rosehips, I would recommend using cheesecloth doubled over to do the first strain to remove all the tiny little hairs and seeds in the fresh rosehips. And then I would recommend using a coffee filter just to get a very clean final tincture. And then you can just simply put it into your bottle. You can use, like I have these amber glass dropper bottles, but you can also use any glass jar you have. I like to take about 2 to 3 droppers full per day of this tincture during the winter. and it will last a very long time if you strain off the tincture fully and store it in a dark, cooler place. I like to use most of my tinctures within 2 years, but alcohol is a great preservative, so you don't need to worry too much if the tincture smells fine and there's no visible mold. You can consume rosehip tincture directly, like I do. Just add the dosage right under your tongue and hold it there for about 30 seconds and then swallow. You can dilute it in a cup of tea. You can make rosehip tea and then put the tincture dosage in there, or another herbal tea. I also like to add a dosage of rosehip tincture to my tablespoon of fire cider, but you can also add it to any herbal remedy that you make. I've added it to my elderberry syrup before. I make a thyme syrup for coughs that I've added this to as well, just to double up on the nutrients that I'm getting when I take those supplements. I'll leave a link to recipes for fire cider and that thyme syrup I mentioned in the description as well. If you want to have regular herbal remedies and tincture recipes sent to your inbox, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter. I send out 1 email per week with lots of recipes and simple tips. And don't forget to check out that recipe book with over 10 tincture recipes to try this winter. I hope you give rosehip tincture a try. Thank you so much for stopping by. I will speak to you in the next video.